The United States struck Iran's coastal defenses, not its capital and not its nuclear facilities, but the military systems protecting one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Within hours, Tehran responded by targeting American military assets across Gulf states instead of striking the U.S. mainland directly. That contrast immediately raises deeper questions. Why were these particular targets selected? Why are Gulf states increasingly becoming the front line of this confrontation? Is this simply retaliation or part of a broader struggle to reshape the balance of power around the Persian Gulf? The strategic reality extends far beyond missiles alone. It involves deterrence, maritime access, alliance credibility, and control over a region central to global energy flows. Most headlines focus on what was hit. The real question is why those targets were chosen. To answer that, we must look beyond the immediate exchange and examine the calculations driving both sides. The latest round of military exchanges unfolded with unusual speed. According to official announcements, the United States carried out strikes against elements of Iran's coastal defense and missile infrastructure, signaling an effort to reduce capabilities that could threaten maritime traffic and American forces operating throughout the region. Shortly afterward, Iranian officials claimed responsibility for retaliatory attacks targeting U.S. military assets across Gulf states, presenting the response as a demonstration that pressure on Iran would carry consequences beyond its own borders. While some operational details remained contested, the sequence of events was widely acknowledged, underscoring how rapidly the confrontation had evolved. Geography explains why these developments immediately attracted global attention. The Persian Gulf is not simply another body of water. It serves as the gateway to the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant share of the world's seaborne energy exports passes. American military installations positioned across Gulf states have long supported regional deterrence, protected maritime routes, and reassured partners concerned about instability. Their presence also makes them highly visible symbols of U.S. commitment, turning them into potential targets whenever tensions escalate. The international response reflected those broader stakes. Governments urged restraint while monitoring the possibility of further military action, and commercial shipping companies watched developments closely as concerns over maritime security and insurance costs resurfaced. Energy markets also reacted cautiously, aware that even limited disruptions around the Gulf can influence prices and supply expectations far beyond the Middle East. Yet the latest exchange was not designed merely to inflict damage. It was intended to send a strategic message about deterrence, resolve, and the costs each side believes it can impose without crossing the threshold into full-scale war. That message becomes much clearer once we understand how the Persian Gulf became one of the world's most strategically contested regions. The current confrontation did not emerge overnight. It is the latest chapter in a strategic rivalry that has evolved over decades, shaped by shifting regional alliances, military innovation, and competing visions of security in the Middle East. To understand why recent strikes focused on coastal defenses and Gulf infrastructure, it is necessary to look beyond today's headlines and examine how both Washington and Tehran gradually adapted to one another's strengths and vulnerabilities. Relations between the United States and Iran deteriorated dramatically after the 1979 Iranian Revolution, transforming former partners into long-term adversaries. Since then, periods of direct confrontation have alternated with diplomacy, sanctions, proxy competition, and efforts to avoid an outright conventional war. The Iran-Iraq War further reinforced Tehran's perception that national survival depended on building military capabilities that could compensate for limitations in conventional air and naval power. Rather than attempting to match larger militaries ship for ship or aircraft for aircraft, Iran increasingly invested in strategies designed to complicate an opponent's operations and raise the potential costs of intervention. That approach gradually evolved into what military planners describe as an anti-access and area denial strategy. Instead of seeking decisive battlefield victories, the objective became to make the Persian Gulf a more challenging environment for superior forces. Over time, Iran expanded its arsenal of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, fast attack craft, coastal defense systems, and surveillance networks. Each capability alone might not fundamentally alter the regional balance, but together they created layers of deterrence intended to threaten military bases, naval vessels, and commercial shipping during periods of crisis. Geography magnifies the effectiveness of that strategy. The Strait of Hormuz, linking the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the wider Indian Ocean, remains one of the world's most strategically important maritime passages. A substantial portion of globally traded oil and liquefied natural gas moves through this narrow corridor, meaning that even limited security concerns can influence shipping patterns, insurance premiums, and energy markets worldwide. What appears to be a narrow stretch of water has repeatedly shaped global politics. For the United States and its regional partners, preserving freedom of navigation has therefore remained a central strategic objective. Decades of naval deployments, defense agreements, intelligence cooperation, and military partnerships across Gulf states have been designed not only to reassure allies, but also to deter actions that could threaten maritime commerce. Yet this has also created a paradox. Conventional naval superiority provides overwhelming military capabilities, while Iran's geographic position and asymmetric doctrine allow it to impose uncertainty without matching that conventional strength directly. Previous maritime confrontations have reinforced lessons on both sides. Episodes involving commercial tankers, naval escorts, and regional crises demonstrated how quickly localized incidents can generate international economic consequences. Each confrontation encouraged further investments in surveillance, missile defense, naval coordination, and regional partnerships, while also reinforcing the importance of deterrence and crisis management over outright military victory. With that historical foundation in place, the latest exchange begins to look less like an isolated military incident and more like another move in a long-running strategic competition. With that background established, we can now examine the strategic calculations driving both Washington and Tehran. The latest exchange becomes far more revealing when viewed through the lens of strategy rather than destruction. Coastal defense systems are not merely static military installations. They form part of a broader defensive network designed to monitor maritime approaches, complicate naval operations, and strengthen deterrence. In military planning, controlling the coastline means influencing what happens far beyond it. The objective is not necessarily to stop every ship or warship, but to create enough uncertainty that any military operation carries greater risk and higher political costs. From Washington's perspective, striking elements of that network can be interpreted as an effort to reduce Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping and allied naval forces operating near the Strait of Hormuz. Protecting freedom of navigation has long been a central objective of U.S. policy because uninterrupted maritime trade underpins both regional stability and the global energy market. Equally important is the message sent to partners across the Gulf. By responding militarily, the United States demonstrates its willingness to defend existing security commitments, reinforcing deterrence not only toward Iran, but also among allies who depend on American support. Iran's response reflects a different but equally strategic calculation. Rather than attempting to match American military capabilities directly, Tehran has historically emphasized imposing costs through asymmetric means. Claims of retaliatory attacks against U.S. military assets in Gulf states fit within that broader approach. Whether viewed as retaliation, signaling, or deterrence, the underlying objective appears to be demonstrating that military pressure on Iran cannot remain geographically confined. By expanding the perceived battlefield beyond its own territory, Tehran seeks to remind adversaries that regional military infrastructure remains vulnerable even after strikes on Iranian positions. This places Gulf states in an increasingly delicate position. Their security partnerships with the United States provide advanced defense cooperation and reassurance against regional threats. At the same time, these governments have strong economic incentives to prevent their territories from becoming recurring arenas for military confrontation. Their prosperity depends heavily on stable energy exports, secure shipping routes, international investment, and regional confidence. Every escalation, therefore, forces them to balance collective security obligations against the equally important goal of limiting instability. Beyond the visible military actions lies another contest that receives far less public attention: strategic communication. Modern military operations are rarely intended solely to destroy physical targets. They also transmit messages to adversaries, allies, financial markets, and domestic audiences. Every strike, deployment, or interception can signal resolve, restraint, capability, or political intent. Intelligence assessments play a crucial role in shaping these decisions because both sides must estimate how much pressure the other is willing to absorb before responding more aggressively. This is where tactical success and strategic outcomes may diverge. Damaging military infrastructure can reduce immediate operational capabilities, yet it may also strengthen an opponent's determination or reinforce existing security narratives. Likewise, a retaliatory strike may demonstrate resilience without fundamentally altering the broader balance of power. Public statements often emphasize military achievements, while the deeper objective remains influencing future behavior and preventing either side from miscalculating the other's intentions. This is where the story shifts, from missiles and airstrikes to the architecture of regional power. If these calculations are correct, the consequences extend far beyond the Gulf. The immediate military exchange may appear geographically contained, but its implications extend well beyond the Persian Gulf. Modern geopolitics is shaped as much by interconnected systems as by military capabilities, meaning that even limited strikes can influence regional security calculations, global markets, and diplomatic relationships. The significance of the latest confrontation lies not only in what happened, but in how governments, businesses, and strategic planners interpret what could happen next. Across the Gulf, security dynamics immediately become more complex. States hosting American military facilities must reinforce defensive readiness while simultaneously seeking to avoid becoming direct participants in a prolonged confrontation. Their governments face competing priorities: maintaining credible security partnerships with Washington, preserving channels of regional diplomacy, and protecting economic stability. Every additional exchange increases the challenge of balancing these objectives without encouraging further escalation. Israel is also likely to view developments through the broader lens of regional deterrence. Any demonstration of Iranian military capability or any indication that U.S. commitments remain firm influences Israeli strategic planning. Although each actor pursues its own national interests, their security calculations are increasingly interconnected, meaning that events in the Gulf inevitably affect decision-making across the wider Middle East. The economic dimension is equally significant. The Persian Gulf remains one of the world's most important energy corridors, and uncertainty surrounding maritime security can influence oil prices, natural gas markets, shipping costs, and investor confidence long before physical supplies are disrupted. Insurance premiums for commercial vessels often respond quickly to elevated security risks, increasing transportation costs that ripple through global supply chains. Even when tankers continue operating, the perception of heightened danger can reshape commercial decisions and financial expectations. Beyond energy markets, the confrontation also carries implications for great power competition. Major powers with economic or strategic interests in the Middle East closely monitor whether regional stability can be preserved without broader conflict. Diplomatic engagement, military signaling, and alliance management therefore become part of a wider international contest over influence, credibility, and crisis management. The response of external powers may shape future negotiations just as much as the military actions themselves. This illustrates a recurring pattern in international politics. Tactical military exchanges rarely remain isolated events. They influence diplomatic positioning, alliance confidence, commercial behavior, and strategic planning across multiple regions. The battlefield may be regional, but the consequences are global. The next question is whether this trajectory leads toward containment, escalation, or renewed diplomacy. Predicting the next phase of this confrontation requires caution. While military capabilities are visible, political decisions ultimately determine whether crises remain contained or evolve into wider conflicts. Several realistic pathways are possible, each shaped by different calculations of risk, deterrence, and national interest. The first scenario is continued managed military pressure. Under this outcome, both sides maintain limited strikes or carefully calibrated responses designed to demonstrate resolve without provoking full-scale war. The opportunity lies in preserving deterrence while avoiding catastrophic escalation. The greatest risk, however, is that a miscalculation or unexpected battlefield incident could rapidly undermine those intentions. Observers should watch for the scale of military operations, official statements emphasizing restraint, and continued communication through diplomatic or military channels. A second possibility involves broader regional escalation. Additional attacks on U.S. military facilities, expanded involvement of Gulf states, or repeated disruptions to maritime traffic could draw more regional actors into the crisis. Such developments would increase pressure on alliance commitments and raise the likelihood of a wider military response. Indicators would include expanded force deployments, heightened defensive measures across Gulf bases, and sustained threats to commercial shipping. A third scenario centers on economic coercion rather than direct military confrontation. Pressure on shipping routes, tighter sanctions, counter-sanctions, and financial restrictions could become the primary instruments of competition. This approach allows governments to impose costs while avoiding some of the immediate dangers associated with conventional conflict. Nevertheless, prolonged economic pressure could increase volatility in energy markets, disrupt supply chains, and deepen geopolitical divisions. Shipping activity, insurance costs, commodity prices, and international financial measures would all provide important signals. The final scenario is negotiated de-escalation. Third-party mediation, confidence-building measures, renewed diplomatic engagement, or practical arrangements to safeguard maritime navigation could gradually reduce tensions without resolving every underlying dispute. While this path requires political compromise, it offers the greatest opportunity to stabilize regional security and protect global economic interests. Diplomatic meetings, indirect negotiations, and coordinated international initiatives would all suggest movement in this direction. History suggests that the next move may depend less on military capability than on political calculation. Ultimately, the latest exchange raises a larger question about the future of power in the Gulf. As we return to the question that opened this documentary, the choice of targets begins to make far more sense. Coastal defenses and Gulf military bases were never simply convenient objectives. They represent the infrastructure of deterrence, the mechanisms through which both sides seek to influence the strategic environment without necessarily crossing the threshold into full-scale war. What appeared to be another exchange of military force was, in reality, a contest over leverage, credibility, and the ability to shape an opponent's future decisions. That broader perspective reveals an important lesson about modern conflict. Military operations rarely exist in isolation. Every strike carries diplomatic consequences, every deployment influences alliance politics, and every escalation affects economic confidence far beyond the battlefield. Geography remains just as important today as it has throughout history. The Strait of Hormuz is not strategically significant because of its size, but because its location connects regional security with global commerce. As long as that reality endures, competition around the Gulf will continue to shape international politics. The outcome of this crisis will therefore depend on more than military capability alone. It will be shaped by intelligence assessments, political judgment, regional diplomacy, alliance coordination, and the willingness of governments to manage escalation before events move beyond their control. Tactical successes may influence individual engagements, but long-term stability depends on strategic restraint as much as operational effectiveness. The world's attention may focus on the next strike. Strategists will be watching the choices that come before it. The next chapter may not be written by the next missile launch, but by the strategic decisions made in capitals across the Middle East and beyond. The remaining question is whether military deterrence and diplomacy can still coexist in one of the world's most strategically vital regions, or whether the balance has entered a new and more dangerous phase.